So thank you everyone for coming. My name is Cody Armstrong, and we're talking about the drawing basics today. So we're going to focus mostly on 2D drawings, how to create them, and all the different things that we can do with Onshape drawings. So Onshape drawing basics, that's what we're going to focus on for the next hour or so. As I always say with these webinars, I really encourage you to ask any questions that you'd like. So there's a questions dialog in your GoToWebinar control panel. Feel free to type in any questions you'd like. I'll do my best to stop from time to time and ask or answer any questions. And if I don't get to your question again, stick around. I'll make sure to address them before I close things out here today. So Onshape drawing basics. Now, if you're just getting familiar with Onshape, there are a few things I like to point out to the new user who may just be getting started. And the first is Onshape's mission statement. And that is getting everyone working together with CAD on any device, anywhere. And this includes mobile devices, things like iPads, iPhones, Android phones, and tablets. So if you haven't downloaded the Onshape mobile app yet, I definitely recommend it. It's a very neat 3D full-blown CAD application built right into your phone or, again, tablet. So not just a viewer, not just a markup tool, but a dedicated CAD application built specific for mobile OS. The other thing I want to point out is, of course, it's not just mobile platforms. It's also Linux, Mac, Windows, Chromebooks. So a number of different platforms are supported. Really, you can get access to your CAD data from just about anywhere. So everyone working together with CAD on any device, anywhere, that's our mission. Now, there are some other elements of this that I want to point out. And the first is we do consider ourselves professional 3D CAD. And when you think of professional 3D CAD, it's really three pieces: parts, assemblies, and of course, drawings. And we do have all three major pieces. Some things that really set Onshape apart is our update. And the fact that it's seamless for the end user. So Onshape is constantly evolving, and the end user doesn't have to do anything. Right? There's no effort on your part. There's no updates or file management to do. So parts, assemblies, and drawings, we have all three major pieces, and we're evolving very quickly. In fact, roughly every 3 weeks, you're going to see new functionality being added. Some other things that I like to point out is, unlike a lot of traditional CAD applications that are out there, with Onshape you get version control built in. So you don't have to have a separate data management application to manage major milestones in your design. You can do that with the integrated version control in Onshape. So version control is built into the core of Onshape, and it was a part of the initial functionality. Some other things I like to point out: if you've come from another CAD system, either a 3D or a 2D CAD system, we can read and write a lot of the common CAD formats that are out there today. So, whether it's Step, IGES, Parasolid, any of those neutral file formats for 3D, or even some of the native formats, SolidWorks, Inventor, Creo, CATIA. Nearly any standard 3D CAD format can be imported into a document and translated and viewed right inside of Onshape. And you can also export to a lot of the common CAD formats that are out there. Now, how this tailors to today's topic is in terms of DXF and DWGs. We can also import DXF and DWGs and also export DXF and DWGs. So there are a number of elements to this, but the big thing I want to point out with it is we can read and write a lot of the common CAD formats that are out there. So if you've been using another CAD system, chances are we can read the data from it. The last thing I want to mention is entirely new methods of collaboration. If you haven't shared your document yet, I definitely recommend it. You have tools like real-time collaboration between users and comment capabilities integrated into documents, and seeing each other's screen in real time using follow mode. So there's all kinds of neat things with collaboration in Onshape. A question that's popped up is, what's a version, aka version control? In Onshape, a version you can think of a version as a snapshot of the document, where it captures a snapshot of everything in the document at that moment, and you can always go back and look at it, maybe download the models at that state. But think of it as a read-only, something you can't change, snapshot of everything in your document: parts, assemblies, drawings, even the miscellaneous data that you may import. So that's what we consider a version. And a lot of users out there might, call them revisions. I have major revisions, revision A, revision B, revision C, where I want to be able to go back and look at these at some point easily in the future and mark them as a major milestone in my design. And Onshape, we call it a version, and it's integrated. You don't have to have a different, application. You don't have to manage it, with something else. Okay, so enough of this. What are we going to talk about today? Well, today's really an intro to drawing. So what we're going to focus on is, how do we create drawings? How do we choose a template? How do we insert views, dimensions, notes, and all the annotations that we have in drawings? Also, how do we import and export? So DXF, DWGs, and also templates. DWT templates can be imported and used in Onshape as well, so we're going to cover that. So that's just kind of a rough outline of what we hope to accomplish here today. Again, as I'm going through this, feel free to ask any questions as they pop up. One last thing I wanted to mention, and that's just, of course, importing and exporting. I've already briefly mentioned it, but of course we can import DXF and DWG files natively. So you'll see it imports as a tab, but it also translates it, and so you can see it natively in the browser. So if you have a library of native DXF or DWG files and you want to make an easy way maybe to share them or just to maybe back them up, store them in the cloud, Onshape works really well in that role. So we can import DXF and DWGs, and we can also export Onshape drawings as DXF, DWG, and PDF. So just some boring bits that I wanted to point out before we get into the details here today, that these are the formats that we support, so going in and out of Onshape. All right, so enough slides. Let's get started. Now, I'm assuming that you have no knowledge of drawings, so forgive me if you've spent just a bit of time, creating your own drawings up to this point, and we're going to kind of start from scratch here. But maybe you spent some time modeling, a few basic parts, maybe an assembly or here or there, and you're ready to make a documented drawing, maybe for manufacturing or just for your own sake, right? We want to be able to create a standard two-dimensional drawing, front, top, right, isometric, views and annotations and all the usual stuff that you'd expect to see. The first thing to keep in mind, you'll see I have a simple part here in Onshape, is that a drawing is just another tab in your document. So just like another part or another assembly or anything that you've imported, it is another tab here at the bottom of your document, another piece of your document. And in our case, we haven't created it. Right now we have just this one part in my document, but I want to create a drawing of this part. To do that, I'm going to go to the Create tab menu in the bottom left corner, then select Create Drawing. Right, so I select Create Drawing, and I get a prompt to choose a template. And so this is the first choice that you'll have to make when starting a drawing. What do I want to use as a template? And there are a few things that I want to point out when you're first getting started here. If you have no templates of your own, if you're just really kind of getting started, getting a feel for how this works, I'd recommend using the Onshape provided templates. They're very easy, simple templates and are good to get started. We're going to go over later, if you have your own DWT files, you can import them and use your own templates. But if you're just getting started, if you select Onshape in the filter on the left here, you'll see the Onshape provided templates. So as you can see from the list, it's a pretty standard library of ANSI and ISO templates. So we have ANSI, different size templates, and of course ISO, different size templates as well. Some things I want to point out about the Onshape templates. First off, if you have, for instance, a metric part, but you prefer the ANSI drafting standard, we do have options for those. So it's an important thing to point out. You want to choose the right template based on the units of your part. In this case, this is an inch part that I'm working with, so I want to make sure that I choose a template with inch in the name. Right? You'll see a few different styles here. But we also have a series of ANSI metric templates as well. So a very important thing to point out. And then also all of the ISO templates are metric. So if you're using metric units and prefer the ISO drafting standard or use the ISO drafting standard, that's where you'll get started. Okay, so ANSI and ISO drafting standards and a number of different options for different sizes in each. I'm going to start with a simple ANSI C. So I'll left click. Now, some things I want to point out before we get started. You have the filters on the left, which I've already briefly mentioned, and once you've created your own templates, you'll have them listed here. You also have filters here at the top. But one important thing that I want to point out is if you're just getting started and you don't want to use one of these templates, you can create one on the fly with a custom template option. So it's a little subtle option here. You'll see existing templates and custom template, and you can kind of build a template on the fly. So I can define my standard, the size of it, what kind of units, what's my decimal separator, what type of projection am I using. Often the question comes up, how do I create a drawing that's blank with no title block? And this is a custom template option where you say do not include. So all kinds of neat things that you can do with this custom template option. Definitely, worth pointing out if you're just getting started and you don't want to use, kind of one of the out of the box templates. You can, build one on the fly here, hit OK, and, it'll kind of generate this for you. So very easy to do, but definitely something I want to point out. I think it's often overlooked. There is a custom template option there where you can specify all the details of your drawing on the fly. A question, do templates count towards document count? Now you can import a template into any document. I'm going to go over this in just a bit. So you don't have to create a document specific to templates. So you can import it into any one you'd like. So you don't have to create a document just to use your own template. And then, of course, if you use one of the Onshape provided templates, no. If I choose custom template, I'm not using, it's not creating a special document just for that. Okay, so I've decided I want to start a drawing. I'm using the ANSI C template. The question often comes up, well, you have the option for no views, but this option for 4 views is grayed out. Now, the 4 views option, you can also start a drawing, and this is a bit of a tangent, but a very neat technique. You can right-click a part and say create a drawing of that part. And this will automatically give you the 4 views option. So if you're trying to save some time and I just want to create a standard front, top, right isometric, I can automate the insertion of the views with this 4 views option. The key thing there is you need to have to find what part it is and the right click create drawing is the easiest way to do that. In our case, we're going to stick with no views. We're going to start with the basics. I'm going to select OK, and it creates a blank drawing. So as I mentioned before, it now kind of sinks in. It's just another tab in your document. So you'll see here I now have drawing 1 tab that's been created in my document. And of course the toolbar changes, right? So I see drawing specific tools, and I get a little flyout asking me what part or assembly do you want to make a drawing of. So in my case, I'm going to select the rocker right hand, RHS, left click. As soon as I do that, I get this dialog here giving me a prompt to choose. I can choose top, left, right, front, back, bottom, and also isometric, added just recently to this list. So you define your view orientation, and you'll see the view attached to your cursor. Left click to place the view, and there's my front. Right. So when you first create your drawing, you're going to get a flyout asking you to insert or choose the part or assembly you want to insert. Define the view, left click, and place that drawing view. Okay, so now that we're in a drawing and we've actually created our first view, which is this front view, let's go over a few basics of the drawing's interface. The first is, of course, the toolbar, and a lot of this is going to be carryover from, of course, part modeling and assembly modeling, right? The toolbar is here at the top. You have the typical undo option here at the top left corner, and then you have all the specific tools that you need for that application, in this case creating drawing. So I have drawing view tools, I have dimension tools, and different annotation tools. I'm going to try and walk you through an example of each one of these as we go through it here, but just a key thing to keep in mind, the toolbar is of course changed to apply to drawings. One last thing I want to mention before we get too far into it is the release number is something that Onshape employees see just to track things internally. You won't see that number, so you can ignore that. But that's really the key things with the interface. Now, one of the first questions that I want to answer that often comes up is, well, what if I wanted 2 or 3 or 5 sheets in my drawing? Do I need to create a tab for each one? And the answer is no. You'll see the very first icon in the toolbar is Sheets. If you left click it, you'll see an option to add a sheet. So you can have one drawing with multiple sheets, and in theory, if that's the way you'd like to organize it, put everything in a single drawing. So you can add sheets, you can rename sheets, you can move them up and down in the list. It all depends on how you'd like to organize all the sheets in your drawing. Okay, so that's Sheets. Now, the next icon, I'm going to work my way kind of from left to right here, is Properties. And it's another commonly asked question. Well, what if I don't care for the default text size? Or if I don't care for certain things in this particular drawing, what if I want to change them, on like a drawing level? And that's what properties are for. I'm going to show you an example of this in just a bit, but you have options like what's your text size? How many decimal places do you want? What's my decimal separator? And this allows you to change specific things, to a certain drawing. I'm going to go over an example of this when we have a little bit more in our drawing here, but definitely worth checking out the properties panel. This is also relatively new if you haven't used Onshape drawings in a while. And it allows you to change a lot of settings on the entire drawing in one place. So that's Sheets and Properties. Now we start to get into really the details of creating drawings in Onshape. So a question, just real quickly. Sometimes you need an odd view that's not a standard. Can you position the part in a modeling mode and then go back to the drawing mode and paste the current view? This is a very good question. Unfortunately, I don't think that we can do this today. I think this is going to be a limitation. Now we can discuss workarounds, and it may be, potentially capable of doing this, by changing something in the model, for instance. But there's no dedicated function for current view insertion of a drawing view, for example. That's definitely something that I would say is high on the list, or really just custom views in general. You'll see that we have a number of view creation tools, but they're all based off of standard, auxiliary views, section views, detail views, and so on. So that's definitely an area where we can improve. Okay, so we have our standard drawing view tools. One thing that I want to point out here is the update, and we're going to go over it in a bit. I'm going to make a change to this just to kind of walk you through this process. But this icon is going to remain grayed out until there's a change to the part or assembly that's referenced in this drawing. So it's worth mentioning. You have an update drawing. I wouldn't worry too much about it until it highlights, and then that indicates a change. And there may need to be, dimensions refreshed or whatever it is. Another good question. What if I started on a B size sheet and later realized I need to go to a C size? This is another area where we need to be able to swap the template that's used, and the answer is currently no. Right now, we don't have the capability to swap. You would need to create another drawing to accomplish that. So, a question. You've started with a given part. Could you have started from scratch? You can, of course, create a blank drawing. Forgive me if I'm misunderstanding the question. You can create a blank drawing, a 2D drawing, and draw a series of basic, lines and circles, for example. But it's important to point out, the idea behind Onshape drawings is that you create the 3D model first, and then the drawing is really a documenting of that 3D model. Generally, you don't build new geometry in a drawing. That's kind of a 2D CAD workflow that's been around for a long time. But with a traditional 3D approach, you build the 3D model and document it with the drawing. Forgive me if I'm misunderstanding that question. Okay, so I've inserted my first basic drawing view. Front view, very simple. I can go back to the drawing view command, which is the very first view tool here. Select drawing view. I can select the part I want. right? And the orientation I want. So again, if I needed to insert a right view, for instance, or an isometric view in the corner, I can go back to the same drawing view tool that we used just a moment ago by selecting this icon in the toolbar and choosing my view. So that's another way of getting your standard views into your drawings. Front, top, right, isometric. You just select drawing view and then select the view type. Okay, again, same functionality that we saw when we first created the drawing. But another way you can do this in the case of a front, top, and right, or excuse me, a top, right, and isometric, is they're actually projected off of the front. And the neat thing about projecting these views is that it links them. I can, have things like the scale be the same amongst all three of them and change it all at once, right? So there's a lot of neat benefits to projecting a view. So I'm going to select projected view from the toolbar, and then I select the view I want to project off of. Then move the cursor in the direction I want to project, and that's an important thing. So if I wanted a top view, for instance, I'd move up. If I wanted a right view, for example, I'd move to the right. Right. So important thing to point out, in this case, I want a top view, move up, left click when you're satisfied with the location, and it places the projected view. Now, as I mentioned before, they're aligned. So as I move my cursor over one of these views, for example, you'll see this box appear around the view. And if I left click drag, I can actually drag the view and you'll see it updates, the top view updates, right? Because the two, the one is projected off of another, they're aligned. Okay. You can do that one more time, projected view. I'll left click the front, we'll create a right. Okay. And again, projected view, left click the front, and we'll create an isometric. Now, of course, you could have created these using the drawing view tool as well. It's really up to you. In this case, the projected views have some neat functionality built in, but really just want to highlight the projected view command. The next one in my list is, of course, auxiliary views. And auxiliary views allow me to define a drawing view normal to the direction of an edge, for example. So let's say, for example, I wanted a drawing view that was projected relative to this horizontal edge, that it's at some angle relative to one of the default planes. I can use an auxiliary view. Right? So I left-click auxiliary view, and I select the line. And as I move my cursor up, it creates an auxiliary view referencing that edge of the front view. Okay. So the key thing with auxiliary views is they allow you to reference, model geometry, which can be useful if you want to project relative to something on the model. So that's auxiliary views. Again, you're kind of getting a theme here. Select the view, select the reference, left click, and place the view. Now, these next two involve just a step more, and that's because, of course, they involve geometry, and that's section view and detail view. So section view, pretty straightforward. If I left-click section view, you'll see vertical and horizontal as my section view options, and the section view label. So you can get it, any section view label that you'd like. But pretty straightforward. If I wanted a vertical section view, you'll see as I move my cursor down, the dotted line indicating where I want to place that section view. And as I zoom in here just a bit, as I move over the view, in this case the front view, you'll see the section view actually attach or snap to different pieces of the drawing view. And if you look really closely, you'll see these attachments are actually different shapes. So there's a square, that's a triangle, that's a circle. And so they give you visual feedback. For instance, the square is the end of an edge or an end of a line, for example, where a triangle is the midpoint. A circle is a center point. So it's giving you visual feedback to what you're attaching this section view to. So I want to attach it to the center of this circle. Move my cursor down till it attaches. I get that visual cue, left click, then move my cursor in the direction I want to section. Now, it's an important thing to point out. As you're doing this, the question often comes up, well, how do I know what direction it's going to section? And the direction that it's sectioned is dependent on the direction you move your cursor. So it's an important thing to point out. If you want a section going the opposite way, move the cursor in the other direction. Okay. Once you're satisfied, left click and place, and you have your section view. Question: are there alignment options? Break alignment. You do have some alignment options in here. So if I right click a view, and this goes for any view, you'll see a series of options, things like show hidden lines and hide tangent lines. But one of them is a break alignment. So if it's an aligned view, you have the break alignment. You can also create projected views off of this as well. So very good question. You can break the alignment in the right click. One important thing I want to point out about this right click menu while I'm here, another commonly asked question is, how do I change the scale of a view? And you can do that by right clicking in the view and going to properties and then choosing a different scale. You can enter a scale or you can choose from a list of options. Okay. So just keep in mind, you can change the scale of views. If you right click in the view and go to properties, you'll see that scale option. The default behavior, just if anyone's curious, is it will determine the scale based on the size of the model and the size of the sheet. So we'll try and create a reasonable size model so we don't never have that scenario where you insert a part and it's 10 times the size of the sheet, or a dot on the sheet. Maybe it's the inverse. So, but you can change, of course, the scale. Right click in the view, go to properties, and it's there as well. All right, so we've covered section views. The key thing with a section view, you're really just placing either a horizontal or vertical line, and then moving the cursor in the direction that you want to section. And then, of course, left click to place. Then we have a detail view. Now, a detail view, if I left click here, very similar in how it's placed, except the big difference here is instead of a line, we're working with a circle, right? So I can left click, and there's my detail. Okay. Move the view where I'd like, left click again, and it's placed. Okay. So just some things to keep in mind about the detail views. You're really just drawing a circle, and the inside of that circle becomes your detail view. Some questions that often come up: can you change things? Can I manipulate? And the answer is yes. If you grab the circle, you can grab it and move it, drag it around, and watch the detail view update wherever you've placed it. So that's detail views. Again, very simple. You're really just drawing a circle, but then placing the view afterwards. All right, so that is the view creation tools. Now, what I'd like to get into next are some of the different dimension tools. Now that we've created various views, of course, the next step in the process is adding dimensions to these views. And we have a few different dimension types that I want to point out here. But a question that often comes up is, do you have some kind of a smart dimension capability? And that's definitely something that's very high on our list of priorities in terms of capabilities. Today, when you define dimensions, it's done based on the dimension type. So if it's a diameter dimension, for instance, you'll select diameter dimension or radial dimension. Question that comes up: scale of Onshape DWG when exported to DWG or DXF. We do not change the scale of the views, the dimensions, or anything in a drawing when it's exported. So it's going to come out as whatever the scale was when the views were inserted into the drawing. That's what we export as well. So there's no change of the scale. Okay, so the dimension types are really, again, dependent on the type of geometry that you're trying to reference. So, for example, I want a linear dimension between 2 points, for example. I could select the 2-point linear dimension and maybe select the center point of this circle, the center point of this circle, just left click, then move my dimension to where I want to place it, and left click again. And that places the dimension. So very straightforward. And again, select the dimension type, select your references, and then select to place the dimension. Some things I want to point out about dimensions in general. Now, one of the first questions that I often get is, can I move it or can I change the dimension in any way? And the answer is yes. If you mouse over a dimension, you'll see these points appear that allow you to grab and drag to change the dimension's location, even when it's referenced to. So I can attach it to other things in the drawing view by grabbing the dimension handle here and dragging it. So you can manipulate. Another commonly asked question is, what if I wanted to change the tolerance, for example, or what if I wanted to add a note to this dimension? And this is a big one. If you left-click a dimension on the actual text, you'll see a little dialog appears just next to your cursor. If you move your cursor over that dialog, a flyout pops out where you can enter text, you can change the tolerance, you can add symbols, so you can do all kinds of neat things in this dimension properties dialog. But definitely worth pointing out, the key thing with it, again, left-click the dimension, move your cursor over that little dialog, and it flies out. So as I mentioned before, things like tolerances. I can have a deviation type tolerance where I specify plus or minus 5 thousandths, for example. Or you could do something like where I wanted to add a certain centerline symbol or depth symbol, for example. I can do that to the dimension. But commonly, it's something like a typical or a 4x or something, some bit of text that I'd like to add to the dimension. So again, that's the dimension properties. Now, a number of different dimension types. 2-point linear dimension accomplishes many different dimensions, so you can do quite a bit with it. There will be certain limitations. So one example I like to point out is, let's say, for example, I wanted a dimension from the center point of this circle parallel to this edge. So I want the distance, the orientation from this point to this horizontal edge out. If I try and do a 2-point linear dimension, and I select the circle, and I select maybe the midpoint of this edge, I do not get a dimension that's parallel with that edge, right? Because it's between 2 points. So this is an example where the point line dimension becomes very useful, right? I select point line, and now I get a dimension that's parallel with that line. Okay, so if you run into limitations where the 2-point linear dimension doesn't give you the right orientation, relative to whatever you're selecting, it may be a 2-point linear dimension. A point to line, I should say, or a line. So same thing here, where I select line, and instead of 2 points, I'm referencing 2 lines to create my dimension. All right, so just a few questions here. Dual dimensions, no, but that's also very high on our list of priorities. There's no specific option for dual dimensions, but I've seen a number of users insert text to accomplish it. Of course, that's not the ideal workaround, but in absence of it, that is an option. But definitely dual dimensions is very high on the list of priorities as well. So for another question here, partial view only, section views, or other forms. Only circle or other forms. For partial view only, circle or other forms. Forgive me if I'm not understanding the question. So forgive me, partial view only or other forms. Aligned dimensions. The alignment options will allow you to attach. So you actually see as you move or drag a dimension, you get a bit of snap behavior. There isn't a specific option necessarily to attach or align dimensions beyond that snapping behavior. So let's move on. Now, I've covered point, line, 2 different dimension types. It really just depends what you're trying to reference. But they're all linear dimensions, distance between 2 things. Then we start getting into other different dimension types. So for example, an angular dimension, line to line angular dimension. The idea behind it is you select a line, and you get an angle value, right? Because these lines are not parallel, of course, you get the angle. going back to the questions just real quickly, a rectangle detail view is not yet an option. Forgive me if I'm still misunderstanding, but if you're looking to use like a rectangle to define your detail view, that is not an option today. It's currently just the circle. A question that's come up, not aligned from two holes. Can I align it with two holes? With a 2-point linear dimension, you're going to have 2 points as references. So we'll give you the standard vertical or horizontal inferences. Right now, we don't have a way to manually align with other references in the geometry besides the different dimension types. So it would need to be something like a 2-point linear. So forgive me again. I believe that's what you're asking. Okay, so we've covered a few different dimension types. The last one I left off with was just the line-to-line angular dimension, where all you're doing is selecting 2 lines. As long as they're not parallel, you get an angle dimension for them. Then we can use a 3-point angular dimension. This one's very useful if you're trying to select an angle between 3 different points. So I can say, what if I wanted the angle between these 3 points, for example? I can do that with a 3-point angular dimension. The key thing there is, again, like the name implies, it's 3 clicks. So 3 different points as your reference. Okay. All right, a few more questions. Is coordinate dimensions an option coming soon or already available? This is something that we hope to have very soon. Forgive me, coordinate dimensions are you referring to ordinate dimensions? Maybe I'm misunderstanding. Ordinate dimensions are something we hope to have very, very soon. That we know that's very high on users' lists of priorities. So. Question: adding construction line and dimension to scale between 2 holes. Well, we do have construction line tools, and of course you can add dimensions between them. The scaling between the holes, forgive me, is where I'm losing you there. But we do have a construction line tool we're going to cover in just a second. Of course, you can dimension between them. The scaling is the key thing that I want to point out there. If you're scaling, any changes to the part, and this is a key thing to point out, you do not change the part in general here in the drawing. Right? The part changes are in the 3D model. Think of this as the master, and this we're just documenting of it. So if I wanted to change the model, for example, I would need to go back to the part studio that built it. Okay? So let's move on here. Forgive me. This is an example from earlier. Coordinate dimensions are ordinate dimensions. That's what we refer to as ordinate dimensions. And absolutely, in SolidWorks, for example, that's referred to as an ordinate dimension. But yes, that is very, very high on our list of priorities. We hope to see that in drawings very soon. So. Okay, so I've covered the 2 different angular dimension types. The last 2 we have are very straightforward. We have radial dimensions and, of course, diameter dimensions. And like the name implies, it really just depends what you're trying to dimension. So if I just want a dimension of a radius, I select radial dimension, I select the arc, and it applies a radius value to it. So very straightforward. As I mentioned before, you can also edit dimensions. So a very common thing, for example, is to edit a dimension and add some text here. So I can add 4x, for example, or it shouldn't be 4. It should be 3x. Right? So I can define 3 of these. So you can go through and edit each of these dimensions as you choose to with that dimension properties. But radial dimensions, very simple. Diameter dimension, same thing. You select diameter dimension, you select the diameter, and of course, you get a dimension. Right? The key thing there is it gives you a diameter symbol, indicating that it is in fact a full diameter. So again, pretty straightforward. The key things I want to point out is that we do have different dimension types, and it really depends what you're trying to dimension, what specific entities you're trying to reference. Now, the question earlier about things like text size and templates and all those kinds of things, and what I was mentioning earlier, a command called properties panel. So in the very first set of tools here, there's a properties icon. One of the questions that often comes up, well, what if I wanted to change the text size of all my dimensions at once? Or, what if I need to change the decimal places of everything at once? And that's where you can do it. So now that we have a few dimensions here, you'll see if I bump the text size up, all the dimensions grow, right? Or I can say, okay, I want 4 decimal places for all my dimensions, and all of them change at once. So you have this single place to change all the different properties, things like tolerances, leading and trailing zeros, the gap between geometry and text, and so on. But it gives you a lot of very fine control over the look of all the different dimension styles. And again, this is something that's relatively new and that we hope to grow, and expand in the near future. So that's the properties panel. I'm going to close that one back. I know I showed that earlier, but I just wanted to show you where it might be used if you need to globally change all your different dimension sizes at once. It's very useful for that. So all the different dimension types we've covered. I'd like to spend a moment going over a number of the different annotations that we have. And I'm going to start with a datum symbol. And a datum is pretty straightforward. If you're trying to reference a certain piece, you'd often attach a datum to it as a reference. Now, as I select datum, as I move my cursor over a view, for example, where I might want to place the datum, you'll get that same visual cue indicating what you're attaching things to. Same thing I saw just a bit ago when I was placing section views, and I can left click and place, for instance, my datum. Right, so we can place a datum here, for example, left click, and it places it. Okay. I can drag and move it up, down, in or out by its handle, so you can manipulate it afterwards. But again, very straightforward. You're attaching it to an edge or a reference in your model. And that's a datum. Now, a tolerance symbol, geometric tolerance symbols are very, very common in the industry today to indicate different things like concentricity and perpendicularity and all kinds of different, position symbol tolerances and things like that. And there's a number of ways that you can use this. So I just want to show the capability here. The geometric tolerance symbol right here next to datum, you select it and you get the tolerance. And I can go in and define, what kind of symbol do I want to define? What kind of call out? So I can say, let's do concentricity, with a tolerance of 30,000. So I can go through and build this tolerance symbol with primary, secondary, and tertiary references and things like that. And then once I hit the green check, it places it, right? So now I have this tolerance attached to my cursor. And I can place it in the bottom corner. I can move it here under a dimension. One thing that we want to do in the near future is allow you to be able to attach it to different reference geometry. But as of today, it's a floating entity. And I can move it down here and attach it to this edge, for example, or attach it to a various dimension. So geometric tolerance, very easy to do. You select the command, you fill out the information. As soon as you hit the green check, it then becomes attached to your cursor, and then you left click where you'd like to place it. So the next ones in my list are notes, and we have 2 different types of notes. We have a standard, any kind of text, and of course we have a note with a leader. So if I'm trying to highlight something on the model, we have a note with leader option. So first one is, of course, note, and note's a very useful thing for just applying text. If I needed to add a note here that said, paint, for example, I can do that, right? Paint black. So if I just needed to add some bit of text, I can do that. Some things I want to apply to mention about a note. It's of course it's just a string of text, so you can add anything you'd like. You start by defining the size of the note. So as I move my cursor down, I left click. That defines the top left corner of the note. Then move your cursor, left click again, and that defines the width and height of the note. And then you can start typing. So there is 2 clicks to placing it. Once you've placed it, you can start typing, and it adds it to the note. Some other things I want to point out. First off, the font options. Okay, so we have a number of different font options. A question that often comes up, can I use fonts on my local machine? The answer is no, and there's a number of reasons. But we wanted to make a certain set of fonts. These are freely available fonts, by the way, in terms of licensing and things like that. But also means they're cross-platform, which means you could log in from a Windows machine or a Mac machine, and you'll have the same list of fonts. So we have a list of fonts here to choose from. You can choose your font type. You can type in a size. Right, I can set bold, italics, and all these different options. So let's go Deja Vu, and let's do a 1/4 inch. There we go. I can set bold, italics. I even have alignment options. And the neat thing about the alignment options is if I needed to fill out the title block very quickly, for instance, I can draw the note, the size of the cell that I'm trying to fill out, align it center, and now I have text perfectly centered within my cell, right, in the title block. So very easy way to fill it out. I can do center justifications. I can even add symbols and things like that as well. Okay. But again, just a generic note, just a string of text that you can apply anywhere in your drawing. So if it's just here in the bottom corner, if I wanted to add some, bit of text to the title block, it really depends on what you're trying to do. But that's a simple note. And then we have note with leader. And of course, the big difference here is this allows you to attach it to an edge of the model. And it's a very similar to the datum I was showing you a moment ago. So if I left click here on this edge, for example, move my cursor up, left click again, let's say deburr this edge, right? Green check OK, and now I've added a note with a leader. And the big difference there is you have one more step where you first attach the note with the leader and then define the note's font and text and all those details. So those are the 2 different note types. Now, of course, you can use them to fill out the title block. I'm going to show you in just a bit a faster approach to doing this, so bear with me for just a second here. But it is a way to accomplish that. So if you have a blank title block, you can do that too. Now, a question that's come up, and this is a commonly asked one, can you add an image or a logo in addition to text notes? And right now, there's no image support. These questions that you're asking, just know that many of them have been asked before, and that we're very hard at work trying to build this stuff for you. So we hope to have image support, ordinate dimensions, a whole bunch of different smart dimension tools and things, hopefully in the near future. But just know that very high on our list of priorities. So I've created the 2 different note types. The next one on my list is, of course, a balloon. Now, balloons are probably a little bit more relevant when we get into an assemblies. I'm going to go over an example of that in just a bit, or a multi-part parts video. But again, very similar to a note or a datum. The first step is to locate what you'd like to attach that balloon to. Left click, and then move the balloon where you'd like to place it. Left click again, and you have a prompt to choose your label. Right? So in this case, it's automatically defaulting to 1. I could go in, and if I wanted to add anything I wanted in terms of text to the balloon, it will auto increment. So if I go to the balloon again and choose another balloon, it will automatically go to 2 and then 3 and so on. So that's the balloon command. The next one in my list is a table. Now, balloon and table, we're starting into bill of materials functionality and things like that. This is another area that we hope to expand very, soon, the automated capabilities for these types of tools. Today, what we have is what we refer to as a general table. And a general table allows you, as the name implies, to just build a blank table. It could be used to fill out a bill of materials. It could be used for a whole table. It could be used just to store data in a drawing if you choose to. But it's just a general purpose table. So I left click, right? I select the number of rows, the number of columns. If I want a title or header row, I can do that. Right? Then I place the table. Now, it's very similar to a note in the sense that the first thing you do is define the top left corner. Right? Top left corner, then drag out to define the size of the table. Left click again, and you've placed your table. Right? I can start typing in text. I can change the font sizes. I have all those options as well. And you do have some table editing options as well. So if I select a cell, for example, I have insert options like inserting rows and columns. I also, if I select, two cells, for instance, I can merge them. So you do have some edit table functionality. Just keep in mind you have to select one of the cells or a series of cells to get that edit table dialog to pop up. And you can choose all the different insert options as well as merge options and so on. So that's a general table. Again, very similar to a note in how it's located top left corner, and then define the height and width. Then we get into some of the other annotation types, things like construction lines. We have two different types of construction lines, and then circles. And these are primarily to construct geometry for references. So I can select 2-point center line, for example, and select a point, and it creates a center line. Right. I can even drag the endpoints of these lines and extend them, so I can manipulate them. So you do have some control. Again, very similar to a 2-point dimension. Left click, and then manipulate as you choose. A few questions. Revision table attached to the model. Right now, all we have is that general table. As I mentioned before, bill of materials, whole tables, things like that, very, very high in our list of priorities. But as of today, it's a general purpose table. Okay, so that is a 2-point center line. Now we also have a line-to-line center line. This is very useful if you're trying to reference something, for example, that you don't necessarily have the endpoints to select, and I can select a line, and I get a center line between them. The neat thing about this is, of course, it updates with any changes, but if you don't have an easily selectable point to reference for your 2-point center line, the first command I was showing you a second ago, you can use the line-to-line center line, and you can reference two different lines of a view. So that's the 2-point center line. The center mark is for attaching center marks to circles. Right, so you select center mark, you move your cursor where you want to place the center mark, and left click, and it places center marks. Right, very easy to do. Okay. So that's the center mark command. Just select any radius or diameter, and we'll add a center mark there. The last tool in our list of annotation tools is the simple line command. And the only difference really between line and construction line is it allows you, of course, to draw a solid line instead of a construction geometry. So if you're trying to construct something in a drawing, you can do that by drawing solid lines, right? So that is an option there as well. You have the solid line. All right, so that is all the different dimension tools and drawing tools and view tools and annotation tools. As I mentioned before, this is an area where we're rapidly evolving. The general table was added just last month. The properties panel was added just a few weeks ago. So you're going to see a rapidly evolving drawings package. One last thing I want to point out is this refine graphics functionality. So the very last icon. If I'm working really close in on a model and I don't care for these facets, again, these don't show up when you do things like print, for example. But if I wanted a screenshot and I really wanted to clean up the model, I could do a refine graphics and let it clean up any of the facets that we see. And the reason behind that is we really wanted to speed up the performance of the drawings as best we could, but still allow the user to get the cleanest looking graphics if they chose to with that refine graphics. So that is the tools that I wanted to mention here today. Now, one last thing that I wanted to get into is the title block and filling out the title block and templates and all those kinds of details. So one of the first questions we get is, can I automatically fill out the title block based on a certain series of properties? And the answer is yes. In the default templates that Onshape provides, you'll see these notes are actually attached to things. And if I right-click and go to the properties of this drawing, I can edit things like the description, and change text for the description of this drawing, right? And it will actually populate in the title block. So these are linked. The sheet number, for instance, is linked. If I created another sheet, it would be 2 of 2, and this would be 1 of 2. So these will update in those scenarios if you fill out the properties associated with the drawing. Now, as I mentioned before, many users out there, and you still can, of course, just create a simple note, insert it into the title block and insert your text. And there are still a lot of users that do it that way. The ability to link it to a property is relatively new, in the last few weeks. As I mentioned before, every few weeks you'll see new updates to Onshape. So this is one of the most recent ones. Now, the question often comes up, well, what about custom templates? Or how do I deal with, so I don't want to use one of the Onshape provided templates. And I've already briefly shown you one of your options. And that is, of course, when you go to create drawing, you have this custom template option here at the top. And that will build one on the fly for you. But what if you have your own templates already? What if I have a library of templates that I want to use? I want to import into Onshape. And you can do that. There's an important step that I want to point out, and that is that it must be imported as a DWT file. So you generally want to, create or, save your template as one of those or that file format, and then you can import it into a document. So I want to walk you through that process. Let's go through it real quickly here. The key thing to keep in mind, and this is a question from earlier as well, is do I need to import it into a certain place? Does it need to go in a very specific document? And the answer is no. You can import your DWT template, if you have that file, into any document, and Onshape will automatically recognize it. Now, just one thing that I'd recommend, especially for those pro users out there that have unlimited documents, creating a document for organization is never a bad idea, right? Because it can be difficult to find the DWT if you have dozens of documents. So just keep that in mind. If in general, creating a document isn't a bad idea. But for those users out there that are limited on documents, you can import it into anything. Right? So let's walk through that. Now, what I'd like to do, let's go back here to the documents page. I'm going to create a new document called drawing templates. Now, this again is not required, just something that I do for organization, but you can import it anywhere. I'll hit OK. We create a new document. Now, I want to import my DWT file, right? So I go to the bottom left corner, and instead of creating a new drawing, I want to import. Now, a bit of an off-topic thing, but remember, you can import anything into an Onshape document, any file that you'd like. Right? So I can go to import and browse to the file I'd like to import. Now, in the case of DWT files, Onshape automatically recognizes them and allows you to use them as your custom template. So here's my DWT file. I open it. It's imported into the document. Right? And now when I go back and create a new drawing, for example, under My Templates, you'll see My Custom ANSI C. Right? So the key thing here is, if you have a template in the DWT format, which by the way is the standard in many 2D CAD systems out there today, if you have it in this format, just import it into a document and you'll see it as an option under My Templates. Now, what if you have nothing and you want to build your own template from scratch? Right now, we can't customize and save a template natively inside of Onshape, but there's some things that you can do. And if you're just getting started, some things I'd recommend. And the first is doing a search. If you want a good starting point, let's say I like the Onshape provided templates, but I want to tweak them for whatever reason. The Onshape drawing templates are a public document. You can download the DWT files that make up the standard Onshape templates, and you can change them. Now, the key thing here is you'll need to use a 2D CAD editor of some sort. So if it's AutoCAD, ARES, or Draft Sites, commonly referred to, there's a number of different 2D CAD tools that are out there. To tweak the template, you'll need to use one of those. Once you're done, you can import that DWT back into Onshape and use it. Okay. So just some things to keep in mind. This is another area that we hope to improve very soon, but right now we use a DWT file, and you can download our examples or import your own. All right. So we are almost out of time. One last thing that I wanted to mention, and that is, what if I have drawings already? What if I have a library of DXF or DWG files? How do we deal with that data? And the answer is you can import, as I mentioned before, right? So I can go to import and browse to my DXF or DWG. I can even shift select many of them at once and then import. The neat thing about any file that we recognize, is that we automatically translate it. So it will automatically become an Onshape drawing. So here's an example of a drawing of an idler sprocket that was a DWG file, right? And I can manipulate, I can move things around here. So you do have the ability to change things. But I think the big thing here is if you have DXF or DWGs from other CAD applications and you want to be able to store it, maybe share it, this is a neat way to do it. And it's not just maybe sharing with the shop floor, but remember, because Onshape has a mobile app, you can share it from anywhere, right? So forgive me here. Let's try this out. So I can even go into suspension bracket, for example, and take a look at this drawing. Let's go view only. In my iPad or on my iPhone. So just a key thing to keep in mind, you do have accessibility from anywhere. This is the Onshape mobile app. You could be viewing this drawing from an Android phone, an iPhone, an iPad. So again, key thing is accessibility. But I do want to point out that we can work with all those DXF and DWG files that are out there. All right, one last comment. I know I'm running just a bit over. Export, I mentioned before, you can export DXFs and DWGs and PDFs. You can do that by right-clicking a drawing and choosing Export. Right, so you right-click the tab at the very bottom, you choose Export, and you choose DXF, DWG, or PDF. Okay, so very simple, and it, of course, saves it and downloads it to your local machine. All right, so that is what I had planned for you today. So I'm going to stick around and answer any questions. Feel free to type them in. Going forward, if you're just getting started on Onshape, we really encourage you to try it in your professional work and let us know what you think. There's a feedback tool built in. Take a moment and let us know what you think. Also invite others and share. If you haven't already, share your document. Real-time updating, all these neat capabilities are all kind of integrated into the share capability. The last thing I want to mention is if you're interested in establishing a local user group, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to help you set it up. So that's what I have. I'm going to stick around again and answer any questions that you have, so feel free to type them in. But that's it. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day.